Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Thinking It Through with Nate. I am Nate, your host. A little bit of update on the podcast. I have moved over the podcast from being based on Patreon and Buzzsprout to combining those into Supercast. So this platform Supercast is actually really cool. Basically, it combines those two functionalities of the previous platforms where you can go to Supercast, you can get either a free subscription or you can pay me $5 a month or $100 to get access to all of my videos forever, all of any AMAs that I do in the future, any bonus content, special guests or anything like that are going to be on the podcast. You'll get full access to that if you do just $100 one time. I'm doing this as kind of like an early supporter deal, so that price will go up in the future, but if you get in now on the ground platform, you'll have access to it forever. So I would really appreciate that. Those early subscription people are really going to help me get on my feet and be able to do this more consistently with better quality and keep upping my game on it. So really appreciate it if you want to go over and check that out. The link is just going to be down in the subscription below, and this simplifies things. So there's just one link in the description, so you can go down there. You can go ahead and get access to the RSS feed link that you can take to any podcast provider that you prefer, whether it be Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other third-party podcast apps that you might use. So just go ahead and go down there to the Supercast link, join up as a free subscriber. If that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. I appreciate that even. That's still immensely helpful for helping me get kind of like a count on the platform and get an idea of how many people are listening. And that way, then once you get the RSS feed link, you never have to do that again. So that will be automatically added into your timeline on your podcast app, and any new episodes will just pop up on there, so you don't have to check in on YouTube if you want to listen to it, the audio version, or check in on Supercast consistently to see if I'm posting things. You're just going to get that automatically in your feed. Otherwise, if you want to watch the video version, you can always just stay here on YouTube. There's going to be some bonus content that I'll do in the future that will be produced as a private YouTube video that you'll get access to with a link through that Supercast subscription that will be sent out to your email, and that way you can get access to all the bonus content if you are a paid subscriber. So yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping. Again, thanks so much to everyone who's watching. I appreciate it. I'm just getting started, so even a few views on the videos makes me happy. So but yeah, so let's go ahead and get into the topic today. Today I'm going to be talking about masks. I just want to do like a full rundown of all of the different conversations that happen about masks. Whether we should mandate them, whether they should be in schools, do they actually protect you? Are they effective in at all? What kind of situations are they more or less effective in? What type of masks are more or less effective? It's a very nuanced conversation, and I've just been getting a little bit frustrated by seeing the conversation that happens in the mainstream media and across social media, that people just don't seem to take this nuanced view on something like this, which needs that nuanced view. If you go off of one data point to back up your entire view on masks, you're probably going to be wrong about something in another area, so it really does take a nuanced view. I am going to try to boil all of the information, the data, and stuff like that down to what I would say is a good worldview that we should take on masks at this point in early 2022, at the point where we really only have the Omicron variant circulating around. Maybe there's going to be new variants in the future. I've heard of one called Deltacron. I don't know, but this is kind of just going to be a recommendation for the current state of things and where I see things going in the future, as what I feel is COVID's really finally starting to kind of wind down. I don't think we need to be thinking about it in our daily lives as much. It doesn't really have to play as much of a role in making plans or traveling, at least in the country. So yeah, I think things have shifted, and my overall recommendation that I'll get to at the end is definitely different than a perspective I would have taken towards the beginning of the pandemic or even a year ago. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the tiers of mask effectiveness. Right, so you may have seen studies on this and articles that are for some reason just coming out recently on bigger mainstream media platforms. They're only just recently talking about this, how different types of masks are more or less effective. at preventing the spread of COVID-19. And basically that extends to all other, viruses that may be in the respiratory system, right? So basically what's coming out on this information is that cloth masks, like the ones that most people ended up turning to that were customized, you could put patterns on them, stuff like that and that was more towards like the beginning of the pandemic when all that kind of came out. Those happen to be the least effective masks. And what I mean when I say effectiveness is how well does it stop the spread of COVID-19, right? So it turns out that cloth masks are just not very effective. They may do something, they may catch like the bigger particles, but not all the smaller ones, right? And so even if you're wearing a cloth mask in a crowded environment, you may still be, if you have COVID, passing that on to somebody else. That does get more effective as you get up to ones that are more specifically made for medical purposes. And the very top thing that tops off that list is going to be the N95s, and then KN95s are apparently even like a little bit better. I personally don't know the difference between those two, but just, if you're going to buy a mask and that's something that you are still concerned about, just know that there are these tiers of effectiveness with masks, and that should inform not only your decisions, but how you talk about this conversation. And the reason I think this part is kind of important is because, again, most people were wearing cloth masks. And then, recommendations for mask wearing and mask mandates and stuff like that don't take into account these different tiers for some reason. It's just like, wear a mask, and it's just not that simple. It's more complicated than that. These different tiers of masks have different effects, and that's something that we should be considering when making policy, when making recommendations, when expressing our opinion and making decisions for ourselves. So that's the first thing. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is whether or not a mask is something that protects you or that it's for other people. And I think this is something that I feel like we've known for a long time. It even got into the mainstream discussion, especially probably about 6 months to a year into the pandemic. And everyone was kind of talking about how you're not wearing a mask to save yourself. It doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. And it doesn't prevent you from getting other, respiratory illnesses or whatever. That's not what it does. Now, maybe if you're wearing something like an N95, that may play a role because it has pretty good suction and there's a good filter in the mask. But especially with cloth masks and regular surgical masks, the blue ones that you see everybody wearing, those ones probably aren't going to protect you at all from getting COVID-19, but they do play a role in preventing the spread of COVID-19. So that's just something that, again, one of those things that you should take into consideration when you're deciding how you want to act about masks, what recommendations we should do for society at large and policy decisions and stuff like that. And I think, so there's another part of this that I'm going to leave for later, but I'll get back to this a little bit. Now, the next thing is I want to talk about specifically the situations when they help and when they don't help, right? So when they do help is when you're in a ventilated room that isn't extremely crowded and you're indoors. Obviously being in a room, but if you're indoors in a ventilated room that's not immensely crowded, then masks are going to be most effective at that point. That's the best situation and best argument for wearing a mask if you still want to wear one and if you still think that's something that you should do. But when don't they help is, unfortunately, and maybe not unfortunately, but just factually, a broader category. They don't seem to change the infection rates on airplanes. They don't seem to help in schools because kids are always taking them off and that kind of stuff. And it's just hard to discipline kids to do that. There was a great study done, I think it was in the UK, where they studied a bunch, there was a ton of kids, different school settings, all of these different types of settings that kids were wearing masks in, and then they tracked how often people were getting infected with COVID-19 in those scenarios, and the mask didn't seem to be helping at all versus people who weren't wearing masks. Same thing on airplanes. If you're on an airplane Each seat has its own individual ventilation system, right? So like up above, when you have all those controls up there, that's where the ventilation is coming from. So each seat has its own ventilation system, and it just doesn't seem like wearing a mask actually helps at all in those scenarios because of the way the airflow works. They've done studies on this where people on airplanes wear masks or when they don't, and it didn't seem like it stopped or changed the amount of spread that was occurring. And it doesn't actually seem to happen that often on an airplane anyway, even if you're not wearing a mask, obviously, because there isn't a difference. And so that's one of the situations where masks just don't help. Another situation where masks don't really seem to help at all is if you're in an extremely, extremely packed, crowded room, maybe like a concert venue or, a rally or something like that. It's not going to help you. Like, it's just not. There's too many people in the room, and the ventilation usually isn't going to do a well enough job at making sure that the air is circulating, and there's going to be a little bit that escapes. Even if everyone's wearing a mask, there's going to be little bits of particles that escape, and then you're going to breathe those in, and that's just how it works. So again, we got to remember the three scenarios that kind of make a mask actually effective: indoors, ventilated, not very crowded. And if you don't have those three factors, then all of a sudden masks are pretty much pointless. And so, to kind of elaborate on that a bit, when they don't help, again, if you're in a room that does not have good ventilation or ventilation at all, no windows open, maybe like no good air circulation through the ventilation systems, then masks aren't really going to help you because the air is just kind of getting stale in there and everyone's breathing it in and out. Obviously, there's going to be like some airflow no matter what kind of room you're in, but it just isn't going to be enough if there's not like solid ventilation going through there to actually prevent the spread of COVID-19. So basically, all of this information and data that I'm giving to you right now is basically to inform a few of the policy decisions that I think we should be making, which is that it actually kind of doesn't make any sense to have mask mandates anymore. It really doesn't make sense to have a mask mandate. I live in Utah, and there's been this huge discussion going on in Salt Lake City right now where the Salt Lake City Council is trying to institute a mask mandate for the city at large because the spread of Omicron is so high and blah, blah, blah. Personally, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why are we worried about how fast it's spreading if people aren't dying? Like, wasn't the entire point of this being a problem the fact that people were getting hospitalized and dying? That doesn't really seem to be happening as much with Omicron, and even the people who are usually unvaccinated people, and those unvaccinated people who are getting hospitalized and dying usually have like an average of 4 comorbidities, meaning they have 4 other conditions that are going on, whether it be like obesity or you have some kind of illness that is just like destroying your immune system or something like that. Those are the types of people who were dying from Omicron and getting hospitalized. Something was going to take those people out either way. Like, as cold as that might kind of sound, it's true. Like, they could have, and I hate that I have to say this, but they could have gotten the flu and died as well. And that's the thing, is that it's so frustrating because way back at the beginning of the pandemic with the original variant, even the Delta variant, there were people who were like, oh, it's just the flu. And like, obviously that was not true. But we're getting to a circumstance now where that kind of is true, where if you catch Omicron, vaccinated or not, it's going to be like a cold or the flu for you, especially if you're a healthy individual. If you're an unhealthy individual, that's a different story. It might be a little bit worse, but if you don't have like 3-4 comorbidities, if you're not super elderly or extremely obese, you're probably not going to die from Omicron, vaccinated or not. Like, that's just the data, that's just the stats on it. So we should be treating it like that, and it doesn't make any sense to me to have a citywide mask mandate in the midst of something like this. Like, we don't do that in flu season, we don't do that in cold season. Why would we do that with a strain of COVID that doesn't seem to be hospitalizing or killing as many people as the original 2 variants, and especially not on a scale that should be even considered like a pandemic anymore, right? Like, this isn't ripping through our population, like killing a ton of people like it was at the beginning. And again, those people who are still dying from Omicron have multiple comorbidities. So that's something to consider. I just don't think that having any kind of population-wide mask mandate really makes any sense. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is school mandates. So you might guess I'm opposed to school mask mandates, one, because the data shows that they're just not that effective, and the detrimental effect that having to wear a mask, or even closing schools down because of Omicron. Still, people are doing that. Places are closing their schools down. Um, those kind of things are worse for children than not wearing a mask and like risking possibly catching Omicron. Like it's not, we know it's not that detrimental to children. And we know that masks aren't even really working in schools anyway to lower the infection rate. So why would we mandate them in schools? That just makes no sense to me. Um, Now, the next thing that I wanted to hit on was just a little bit of like perception issues with masks, right? So way back at the beginning of the pandemic, Dr. Fauci came out and said, no, masks don't work. There's no effectiveness behind them. They don't prevent the spread of COVID-19. Like, nobody should be buying masks, whatever. Well, we know now, like verifiably, that he was lying about that. And the reason that he was lying about that was because he wanted to preserve masks and make them available for frontline healthcare workers, which is understandable and like a cause that I think most people probably would have understood and gotten behind, but he lied about it. And so the fact that he lied about it created like two camps of people. There was like the camp people who said, oh no, like this is what he said the first time and that must be true and now he's lying. Which, like, I don't blame you for thinking that. Like, if you're one of those people who think that still, like, I don't blame you for thinking that because it's really shady the way that they did this. But you just have to know the full story, that the reason that Fauci did this was because he was trying to leave masks for frontline healthcare workers. But you should trust us. Like, tell us that and trust that Americans are going to do the right thing. Will some people go and still hoard masks? Yeah, of course. There's some selfish jackasses in our population who would have gone and hoarded masks so that frontline healthcare workers maybe didn't have as much access. But I think the majority of people would have been like, you know what, that's fine. We're just going to stay home in quarantine. That's what we're doing anyway. And we're going to let the frontline healthcare workers get these first batch of masks until we start producing them for the society at large, and then we can all get access to them. Like, that would have been a better messaging thing to do from the top. But yeah, and then of course the other camp was the people who just ignored the first recommendation and then heard that, you know, you should wear masks and just stuck with that. And I think that, like, there's a small portion of the population who, again, is treating this conversation as nuanced and is looking at the full story that I just gave you and saying, like, okay, no, they knew that masks kind of did help in some kind of way at the beginning, which is true, but they just lied about it. And so it created this poor perception that we shouldn't trust the government, and now it's like, if you're not following that story, you don't know what to trust, and you just throw it out of your head and think, whatever, it's just confusing, it's paradox, it's contradicting, it doesn't make any sense, whatever. I'm just not going to pay attention to yet another national politics issue that's getting confusing and polarized. Now, the kind of like, not exactly the other side, but something that's kind of similar to this is that people seem to be wearing masks as like a virtue signal now. Like, hey, I'm wearing a mask, you know I'm a liberal. Like, I don't get that. Like, I consider myself someone who's on the left, right? Like, I'm definitely left-leaning. I would say I'm a progressive, not a liberal or a Democrat or anything like that, but I'm a progressive, and as a progressive, I do value saving other people and making sure that, like, you know, I'm not doing something that's going to make, like, end up hurting somebody else. But like, when it comes to, like, now in 2022, most of the people who are not vaccinated do not care if you wear a mask for them, and they're the ones that are at risk of getting COVID, right? They don't want to wear a mask. They don't want you to wear a mask. So why wear a mask for them? Like, those are literally the only people you'd be wearing a mask for anymore. Like, in all practical senses, like, if you're vaccinated and you catch Omicron, it's not a worry, so who cares? I don't think we need to wear masks anymore. And then people who are unvaccinated, again, remember, masks are for preventing the spread to others, not for protecting yourself. So if you are still wearing a mask today, the stats are you're vaccinated, right? And then the only, you know, people that you have risk to really potentially causing hospitalization and death from are unvaccinated people, and of course those people have comorbidities who actually get hospitalized and die. So you're protecting a very minor part of the population who, you know, for your entire life you didn't wear a mask when you had a cold or a flu, or, you know, during cold and flu season, if you didn't have symptoms, you didn't go out and wear a mask, which those are the same people who are at risk of those viruses that they are of, like, the Omicron virus right now. So it doesn't really make any sense to actually, like, wear a mask anymore for if your argument is to protect people, because those people don't want your protection. They don't care. They're not worried about catching COVID. They've made their choice not to get vaccinated. And even for people who are like vaccine skeptical but still a little bit worried about COVID, I don't think they would want you to wear a mask anymore. They don't care. They're not going to be upset if you're not wearing a mask. Usually the people who are upset if you're not wearing a mask are the people who are vaccinated anyway. And that's why I say it's kind of become a virtue signal. It's one of those issues that's just become polarized. It's like if you're on the left, you wear a mask. If you're on the right, you don't. If you're on the left, you're vaccinated. If you're on the right, you're not. That's not exactly like, the vaccination one especially doesn't fall in exactly along party lines, but it's definitely, there's more people on the left who have been vaccinated than on the right, and you see way more vaccine skepticism coming from the right. So I don't know. It's just frustrating to me to see that the mask issue has become polarized of all things. Like, this is something that this is a discussion that does not have to be political in nature whatsoever. It's just scientific. It's just data. You can look at stats and data and make your decision about whether or not wearing a mask makes sense. And so I don't know, it's weird to me when I see people wearing a mask, and it really just feels like they're doing it just for virtue signaling, like, hey, I'm doing the right thing, even though it really doesn't make sense and you're not really helping anybody. So that's the other thing. Now I wanted to talk a little bit just about whether or not masks should stick around, right? So do masks make sense to be in place for society forever now? Should this become a normal part of our life? I think it was like on CNN or MSNBC or something like that, there was a host recently that said like, well, it seems like masks are just going to be like part of our normal life, just like TSA checks became part of our normal life after 9/11. Like, please no, please no, please no. Like, let's not go there, because this is like, again, it's harmful in certain situations, especially for children. There's like this really sad quote from this teacher who was like asking their kids like, what's the number one thing that you miss like before COVID? And one of their students said like, seeing my friends' faces. Like, that's heartbreaking. Like, you should be able to see your friends' faces. I want to see my friends' faces. Like, I don't think in a situation where there's no stats or data or real great logic to back up wearing a mask, like, let's not do that for other potential risks, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. One situation where I think that it does make sense to have masks still around is if you are feeling sick, right? Like, if you think like, maybe something's coming on, I don't know, like, I don't feel like I necessarily need to quarantine myself, but I do need to go grocery shopping. Well, fine. Like, you might have the flu, you might have the cold, put on a mask. That's actually going to help. Maybe you don't spread the flu or the cold to somebody else. Like, that makes sense to me. That actually is something that has real implication and moral considerations. And even with COVID, if you think you might have COVID, put on a mask. Like, fine. Like, it's not great to spread disease to other people. Like, I understand that, but mostly what I'm getting at is that when you're asymptomatic, if you don't have any symptoms, if you don't feel sick or anything like that, like, you shouldn't feel like you have to wear a mask. Like, that doesn't make any sense, and I don't think we should keep that around. But that being said, these are kind of my like overall recommendations, the direction I think that we should move as a society, policy decisions that we should make, and stuff like that, not enforcing people to wear masks. But I do think it's a personal decision, of course. Like, if you want to wear a mask, go ahead and wear a mask. Just know that that's not doing anything for you. It's not about like, oh, I think people are gross, or I don't want to personally catch COVID. That's not what it's about, because again, the mask isn't protecting you, it's only for protecting others. So just keep that in mind. Like, if that's your reasoning, maybe rethink that a little bit. Maybe rethink like, okay, like, am I wearing a mask to protect other people or for myself? If it's for yourself, doesn't really make sense. Like, the stats and data just don't back that up, and we've known that for a really long time. So if you want to wear a mask, if it really does make you feel better, I guess, and it makes you, you don't care about it, you don't dislike wearing a mask, it doesn't bother you, and whatever, then fine, go ahead and wear a mask. Like, again, that's personal choice. Do what you're gonna do, but just know that like, the stats and data don't back up having it mandated, and you shouldn't look down on other people for not wearing a mask. So, yeah, it's a personal choice, but I just think that the stats and data and the current situation that we're in don't make any sense for it to be policy mandated or for it to be like a population wide, or even in certain populations like schools, or in certain situations like on an airplane or something like that. Like none of those things make any sense. So yeah, that's my rundown of masks. It's just kind of been on my mind recently. There's been a few things that have been popping up that have been making me think, and conversations that I've had, I guess, that are just kind of making me reflect on the current state of masks in our society. And I think this message just needs to get out there more, that like we're kind of to the point where we can move on. Like COVID's pretty much done. The occurrence of COVID in our population right now is not that dangerous to really anybody, unless you're unvaccinated and have multiple comorbidities. You really don't need to be worried about Omicron. And and then if you are, then go get vaccinated, or start eating healthier or exercising, like get into better shape so you don't have to worry about that as much. Those would be my advices before I institute a mask mandate. So yeah, but that's just a quick rundown. Wanted to get that out there, kind of get it off my chest, and hopefully provide a good resource for people to start kind of thinking about this and start to consider what you want to do for your own life, and what policy decisions you'd be advocating for. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Again, just want to give a shout out that I have a new link down in the description below. It goes directly to Supercast, which you can either sign up for a free subscription or a paid one. If you do a paid one, I'd really appreciate it. That helps me out a lot. But even if you do the free one, thank you so much. Like the fact that you want to listen and engage with the stuff that I'm talking about is meaningful to me. And once you do that, you'll get the access to the audio only. If you want to throw that into your podcast, you only have to do it once. Your podcast provider, you only have to do it once, and then it's really easy. You'll just get them in your feed. Otherwise, go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, and bell here on YouTube if you're watching it in the video version, as that will help me a lot. And then you can see the new videos as they come out here on YouTube as well. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and have a great one.